Hi, everyone. I'm Carmine Gallo. You are going to love this next conversation because I think it might very well change your life. And it'll change your life because it's going to change the way you look at the world. Today, I'm talking to Marian Tupy, a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, editor of a website that we'll talk about. It's one of my favorite websites and one that I visit every morning called humanprogress.org. And he's the co-author of a new book called 10 Global Trends Every Smart Person Should Know. So Marian is here to make us a lot smarter. Marian, thank you. I think we need your book now more than ever.
Thank you very much for having me. It is a pleasure to be with you. Indeed, the book is meant to be an antidote to all the anxiety and depression that 2020 has brought about. And this year is not over yet. So buy the book so that you can overcome some of that depression and anxiety.
That's true. There's a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, and based on the evidence that you show in the book, that there's also room for gratitude and appreciation of the progress that we have made. Marian, I am adding your book to a category of books that I call progress books, for lack of a better word. We start with Matt Ridley and Rational Optimists, of course, Harvard's Steven Pinker. And of course, we have an 800-page tome from Deirdre McCloskey. And there are many others, of course, Johann Norberg and, of course, Hans Rosling, Max Roser. And we can't forget one of the most prominent thinkers in this space, Bill and Melinda Gates. What is the general theme that recurs throughout this scholarship, these authors and these thinkers?
The recurrent theme is that something profound, something dramatic happened in the world roughly 250, 300 years ago. So humanity is about 300,000 years old. But for most of that time, we were dirt poor. We lived very short lives. We were beset by disease. We were hungry. Then about 250 or 300 years ago, things started to change dramatically. Think about it as a hockey stick with a long straight shaft at the bottom. That's what standard of living was like for hundreds of thousands of years. And then suddenly, 250 years ago, this upward facing blade. And what all of us have in common is to try to, first of all, measure and popularize the changes that have happened in the last 2 centuries, but also to zero in on the reasons why the last 300 years or so are so much different and so much better than the time before. And the period that we are looking at goes by different names. Deirdre McCloskey called them the Great Enrichment. Other people have referred to it as the age of innovation, or I have referred to it as the age of abundance, but you could also call it the age of enlightenment. Whatever way you want to put it, the last 200 years, 250 years really mark a profound break with humanity's past. And all of us are working on that.
Well, I think your number one trend, which is called the Great Enrichment, the term that Deirdre McCloskey coined from the last 200 years, that is one of the great trends, isn't it, in all of human history? And I believe that the statistic that you're using to show the progress we've made in the last 200 years is per capita income. Is that correct?
Yes, we could look at the entire economy, which is to say that, back in early 1800s, the entire world economy was probably like $1 trillion. And today it's $120 trillion. Or you could look at it at GDP per capita. Let me give you some sense of the magnitude of changes that have taken place. I'm not going to be talking about US, because US is obviously a very advanced and very rich country. I'm going to talk about global average.
Okay.
So whether you look at 10,000 BC, whether you look at year 1, or whether you look at 1700, GDP per person per day was $2. Okay? $2. It was stagnant. And that's incidentally why today, when we talk about absolute poverty, some countries in Africa which still are beset by absolute poverty, we take that $2 per person per day as a symbol of absolute poverty, because that's how people always live, $2 a day. By the time of Jefferson, the global average was about $2.80. So we start seeing it tick up. Today, it's $44, okay? And by 2100, it will be $160 per person per day. These are inflation-adjusted dollars, from $2 per person per day 200 years ago to roughly $44 per person per day today to $160 in 2100.
Marian, that leads us to trend number 2, which is the decline in extreme poverty. Again, a major progress that is unlike anything seen in human history. We'll get to why people don't realize that it's happening, but let me give you some statistics from your book. I believe these are correct. You write that in 1840, nearly 84% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. In 1981, 42% of the global population was still living in extreme poverty. It fell to 8.6% in 2018. Why don't most people see that trend or even know about that trend?
Well, I think that humans suffer from a lot of negativity biases, which interact with media in a way that not only, it's not just that we are ignorant, we are misinformed about how the world really is. And there are a lot of negativity biases in human brains, such as, for example, availability heuristic, which is just a big word for saying that if something is really bad, we tend to pull it out of our mind, the memory folder, with much greater frequency than something which is not particularly dramatic.
I think I have a book back here. Bad is Stronger Than Good by Roy Baumeister.
That's right. So bad is stronger than good, which is another way of saying that we fear losses rather than we appreciate gains, or we fear losses more than we appreciate gains. And of course, improvement and bad things happen on very different timelines. It takes a long time to build a house, and it takes just minutes to burn it down. It takes years, sometimes centuries, to get away from absolute poverty. But you know, like with COVID, we are probably going to be seeing some decline, or rather some rise in poverty again. So good things tend to happen over a very long time, and bad things tend to happen immediately. The nature of the news, you know, the newspapers and the television, they will report on things that happen, such as a war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. But there are 200 countries in the world who are not at war. But those don't get reported because nothing is happening.
Full disclosure, Marian, I was in the news business before I began writing books. I was in television news as a TV anchor for 15 years. And I can tell you, you obviously know this, but sometimes I do have to remind people that my role was not to educate you. It was not to elevate your leadership potential. It was to keep you focused and tuned in to my newscast, which is why we focus on those things that are completely out of the ordinary. There's a lot of exaggeration and hyperbole. Same with social media today. Anyone who watched the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, knows this. Those algorithms are not meant to elevate you. They're meant to keep you focused and attracted to that particular social media platform. These are very important psychological events that we all need to understand in order to not only gain control of our time, Marian, but also our mindset.
I agree. Twitter is a very good example of that. Twitter, if you post something and you get rewarded with likes and clicks.
It's the dopamine hit. I'm getting the dopamine.
That's right. It releases dopamine, which is a feel-good feeling. And so that's, look, if people read this book, but also if they look just in a very pedestrian way at psychological literature, they will understand that human beings as such suffer from a lot of negativity biases. There are good reasons why we look at the world through the opposite of rose-tinted glasses, which is to say that for 300,000 years, we have lived in an environment which was much less conducive to human flourishing. It was much more dangerous. And so this period of great enrichment, this period of the age of abundance, the age of innovation, is something very new to us, and we are trying to adjust to it, and we don't really know how.
Like Steven Pinker has said, some bias toward the negative is necessary because there are more things that can go wrong that can go right. And the things that can go wrong can hurt us more than the things that can go right. And so this negativity bias is justified, especially from an evolutionary standpoint. But the whole purpose of your book and the other scholars is to help people understand that you have to have a balance by seeing how much progress, the extraordinary amount of progress that we have made, it drives future innovation. And it'll make you a better person and more innovative, and make the world a better place by understanding and appreciating how much progress we've come to experience in the last 200 years. But Marian, it's a hard concept, I think, to get across.
Indeed, you know, the oracle at Delphi in ancient Egypt had a motto which said, know thyself. Know thyself first is the first step. Know thyself in a sense of know why you are reacting to certain type of news in a certain way, why you are making yourself unhappy by spending too much time looking at the media. The second thing is know the world. If you are concerned about the world, if you want to improve the world, you first need to know the real state of the world. There's no point talking about changing the world if you don't know what's really happening. And there are a lot of good things which are happening around the world.
Yeah. One of them is this vaccine. Let's talk about that, because I know you have, you refer to it in chapter 34 of 10 Global Trends. I believe you're right. It took 3,348 years to come up with a vaccine for polio. And then you go through the rest of it. It took 3,296 years to come up with a vaccine for smallpox, cholera, 2,500 years. And your point is that within 3 months from the identification of COVID, we already had companies working on the vaccine, and Dr. Anthony Fauci has just recently said that he's cautiously optimistic, in his famous words, that we will have a vaccine by the end of this year or early next year. Well, Marian, I think what people don't quite understand is that that is going to be one of the most historic healthcare developments in all of human history.
That is correct. Never before in human history have we produced a vaccine within a year, and never before has the medical research facilities been set up and working as well and as fast in order to produce life-saving treatments. For most of our history, once again, we are a species that's 300,000 years old. We had no idea what was killing us. People are dropping dead left and right, but we didn't know, we couldn't even identify the pathogen that people were dying from. As you say, polio and smallpox, we know because we have the evidence from mummies. They go back to 3,500 years to ancient Egypt and ancient India. And they were a plague on humanity for all of this time. And they got cured after humanity started appreciating science, after it made scientific breakthroughs and embraced reason during the last 200 or 300 years. As you say, we'll probably be within a year of the outbreak in China before we have a vaccine. And more importantly, we now know what to focus on. Maybe we were asleep at the wheel. Maybe we were a little too complacent. Maybe there were certain bottlenecks that we didn't quite appreciate. Our government certainly has been very late to, has in some cases actually worsened the problem, such as the CDC. But the silver lining is that we are facing a pandemic which is serious, but it is in no way as deadly as other pandemics that we have experienced before. So with this knowledge, with the new machines that are going to be produced in order to defeat COVID, we will be better prepared for future pandemics as well.
Well, it's interesting. I think that's why Bill Gates, for example, when I see him on interviews, he ends almost every interview with the word optimism, or I'm optimistic. And I've noticed that a few times the television host will be taken aback, and they'll quiz him on that and ask him to explain how could you possibly be optimistic with 200,000 deaths, etc. And he tries to explain it almost exactly like you did. And he says that, hey, this is, if this were 20 years ago, we'd be in much, much worse shape. He's inspired by the huge amount of very fast progress that we're making toward a vaccine. And he says that it's a rather simple type of virus. You know, it's a single strand RNA virus to handle. So we are going to develop a vaccine for it. Good thing it was not something far more deadly like Ebola. Now we're going to learn from it, and we're going to be much better prepared the next time. So people like Bill Gates and other optimists recognize the devastation today, but they are looking, like you said, at the silver lining that's going to help us prepare and innovate in the future.
Well, the line of progress, or if you will, the chart of progress, yes, it is going this way, but it is not a smooth line. Progress is not a steady state. It is a jagged line. There are always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We shouldn't expect that the world will be getting better for everyone, everywhere, at all times, as Steven Pinker says. That wouldn't be progress, that would be miracle. And so encountering new problems and having the occasional setback, it is to be expected. Nobody says that, you know, human progress has to continue forever, that it is guaranteed. Human progress goes on because we have people, real people, creating new ideas or coming up with new ideas to defeat specific problems which humanity encounters. So ideas are key, and knowledge is cumulative. So the more ideas we have, the more we know, and we can build on the shoulder of giants who came before us.
That brings up a good point. I think optimism gets a bad rap. I actually think optimism is underrated. Optimists move the world forward. If you look at any of these books behind me, what do we got? Winston Churchill, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt, what have you. They either call themselves optimists, or they were able to see a brighter future in the middle of terrifying ordeals, whether or not they use that word or not. And I think you bring up a good point. Optimists are not Pollyanna. Optimists are like rational optimists, or Bill and Melinda Gates call themselves impatient optimists. Optimism is based on the history of progress, on real data, on real evidence. But as you said, it is not intended to always be a progress of a straight line. That optimists understand that we're going to have those peaks and valleys as progress continues.
Yes, our understanding of human progress is essentially retrospective. It asks a question: is today better than yesterday? In broader historical terms, obviously. The key to understanding human progress is that humanity has always faced problems, and we have solved them through intelligence, through adaptation, through new ideas. There is no reason why we cannot do so in the future. We are not standing at some sort of a unique juncture in human history where humanity has suddenly lost all of its ability to solve problems. We will always have problems. So far, we have solved them, and there is no reason to think that we cannot solve them in the future.
We are in an environment, as you know, that is now leaning toward much more toward the negative and the pessimistic, as it's understandable. It's completely understandable. This is devastating. I like the way some people handle this, though, is in terms of leaders. The other day I was watching Dr. Anthony Fauci, and Fauci said something really interesting. He was telling a group of students at his alma mater that they are living through a historic time, but the one thing we must appreciate is that this is going to end. To stay optimistic. One of the things we have to be careful about is despair. do not give up hope because it's going to end. Why is it that people like Fauci, Gates, and many others do tend to end their conversations or interviews, or at least have this underlying theme that things are going to get better, that that we are learning, that do not give up hope, don't give in to despair? What is it about, now let's get into leadership, Marian. What is it about leaders that drive the world forward that we should all be learning from, especially now when negativity and pessimism and anxiety and depression are at such high levels? What's the lesson for leaders?
Well, I cannot speak for them individually, but historically, people who have accomplished great things tend to be people who read a lot and who appreciated history. I think that's one of the reasons why leaders like that tend to say, don't despair, have hope, is because because they understand, and those of us who work on this subject understand, that humanity has faced much greater challenges before. I understand that a lot of young people specifically are very unhappy about the hand that they were dealt. But looking on the bright side, they're not being drafted to go into Vietnam. They are not being asked to storm the beaches of Normandy. They are not facing a nuclear holocaust the way that people in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis were. And I think that with the study of history, which unfortunately has almost completely disappeared from our schools, with the study of history, you get a sense of the vicissitudes of human fortune, of the fact that every generation has to face some sort of a hardship. And the measure of the generation is not to complain, but to overcome it, just as the greatest generation did.
Point blank, do you call yourself an optimist?
I would call, first of all, I don't consider myself as a seller of optimism. I think of myself as a promoter of realism, in a sense that the numbers in this book and the numbers on humanprogress.org are all real numbers. They're not optimistic numbers, they are just real numbers. And so it happens that the real state of the world is much better than people expect. However, so I promote realism, but personally, I'm a rational optimist, and I'm a rational optimist because we have seen where human intellect and ingenuity can lead. We have solved problems before. We have eliminated polio and smallpox, and we have developed life-saving drugs for HIV/AIDS, which used to be the great concern in the early 1990s. There's no reason why we cannot go on doing that. What we need, however, is freedom, both economic and political freedom, to think, to publish, to speak, to interact with each other, so that we can learn from each other and come up with new ideas and new solutions to the problems that we face.
Marian Tupy, thank you so much. And again, what a great resource as well. Not only your book, which I plan to give as a gift, the 10 global trends every smart person should know. It's more of a coffee table book. I mean, it's not necessarily meant to be read from page 1 all the way to the end. It's got nice graphics and simple explanations. So I actually think it would be a fantastic gift for people to help them understand what we mean by human progress and the Great Enrichment. So thanks for writing that, and thanks for editing that wonderful website, humanprogress.org.
Thank you very much.